Let's talk right now about Trump tariffs with Michael Simmons. He's economics editor at The Spectator. Very good morning to you.
Morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, I wouldn't mind if you wouldn't mind helping us out here in terms of a little bit of explanation of where we are, what the latest is, because everyone is issuing retaliatory tariffs against, well, particularly China and the US. What state are we at and how much the tariffs got up to now?
Well, it's all go, isn't it? You've had Trump yesterday that's basically said that in retaliation to China's retaliation, he's going to put this extra 50% tariff on Chinese goods that are already tariffs, which means that the taxes that the US consumer, US businesses will have to pay on imports from China in some cases is going to be over 100%.
Yeah.
So basically, we're in this huge escalation of the trade war, certainly between China and America. But in a sort of more promising sign, it looks like Britain, at least, is not going to join the retaliation.
Yeah, but I saw a survey saying that more than 50% of Brits think that we should be retaliating with an equal 10% tariff against the US. But so what we were saying, consumers are saying, what I'd really like is to pay 10% more for anything I'm buying from America. That's what that means, isn't it? Our price is going up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, it's my sort of gut instinct as well. Is America are doing it this to us.
Yeah,
we
sod
should
you.
do them
Yeah.
too. But yeah, exactly. But I think when you look at the economics behind it, you really have to ignore that, because what a tariff is it's a tax on yourself. You know, it's just going to make goods more expensive.
Yeah.
And what we should be seeing in Britain is actually this is an opportunity that if America is going to try and, rebalance how its economy works, is going to step away from free trade, then that should be an opportunity for the country that in the world is the most similar to America, which is Britain. How can we become the new leaders of this free trade world?
Except we're not such a big market as America. There's lots of talk about us becoming, Singapore on Thames, and if you come, you basically go complete free trade. But there is an argument for some tariffs, isn't there? I mean, I don't think there's a full, I'm not in favour of this tariff war. I think it'll all end horribly badly. And I think the various aims that Donald Trump has himself stated about, we're going to bring back, onshore all this manufacturing, and these permanent and they're temporary, and we can negotiate and not negotiate. Well, and we're going to make a load of money out of these tariffs, even though, of course, we're going to force people to cut their tariffs so they wouldn't be. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It's all mutually exclusive. He's not going to achieve all of the things he says he can achieve. But there's an argument for tariffs to protect some key industries, to protect, our vital agriculture, to protect steel, and particularly against countries like China, where there are massive state subsidies, which make it impossible for anyone in the West to compete.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, and there is, just as these blanket tariffs are not sensible. I think it also wouldn't be sensible to say, well, look, you just do nothing.
Yeah.
I think a general retaliation is silly, but there are certain things that you have to watch out for. So in the American sense, I don't think anyone would complain about tariffs on, say, microchips, which is such an important part of American development. And over here, what we're probably going to see with China essentially being shut off from US markets is they're going to try and dump already cheap goods onto Europe and onto Britain. Now, there might be an argument that on very specific industries and areas of manufacturing that Britain might want to do something there to stop our markets being flooded with Chinese goods. But I think generally there is more benefit in, being open to that, being open to something that's potentially going to grow the economy.
Right. So we could end up with a load of cheap goods, and a lot of it cheap tap. But let's be honest, we buy a heck of a lot from China. If you're buying on Amazon, I think 80% of goods are made in China, and the other 20% have components, have some element that comes from China, and they are dominating the world. But the reality is, of course, China relies on that income to keep not just its economy going, but also its political system and its military going. There's a kind of a trade-off, like, okay, you don't have political freedom in China, but the middle class can keep getting wealthy. Well, if that isn't the case with economic tariffs, then that can be very destabilizing for China. So there are lots of other risks there in terms of what they're willing to do. China has accused the US of economic bullying. The rhetoric seems to have been ramping up between those two countries, and I've always thought this is more about China than it is about, say, Europe. You've got pretty much the same costs of doing business in America and Europe, other than energy costs, of course, which are much cheaper in America. But China is a different kettle of fish. But are you fearful that, and as has happened many times in the past, that an economic warfare can turn into military warfare?
Well, I think we're quite far away from that, but
I
it's
hope so.
certainly, a risk. We're in this ridiculous topsy-turvy situation where I think yesterday the Chinese Foreign Ministry was tweeting out videos of Ronald Reagan espousing sort of the glories and the pros of free trade. I mean, it's ridiculous
Yeah.
that's the world that Trump has now created. But look, with neither China or America seem willing to back down. The rhetoric is escalating. China this morning basically saying they're going to go, fight till the end. I think when the language gets like that, we're in a worrying position. But I also think that China and Donald Trump are not stupid. They would not want this to turn into an actual war, but miscalculations happen.
And that's the
That has
worry. But the thing is, the crucial thing about this now, Donald Trump has said, these, panicons, these people who are in the Republican Party who are panicking too much about this. Hey, relax it. But the reality is, his election, we were talking about this on the show yesterday at the end of last week, his election wasn't just about immigration and wokeism and all that and net zero. It was about the economy, stupid. It always is, every election, the cost of living. People were freaking out about the cost of eggs a few weeks ago in America. Now the cost of eggs has come down. This is like after an avian flu and millions of chickens having to be destroyed. But when the price of your car, which is an absolute vital necessity for every American, the price of pretty much every white good you buy, any tech you buy, all the expensive stuff, when that stuff is shooting up by 50%, 100% in price, then they're really going to notice it more than the price of eggs. That doesn't bode well, particularly you've got the midterm elections coming up in only a year's time, or a year and a half's time in America as well. Republicans are getting worried, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is going to come down to one, what the markets, and two, more importantly, what the American consumer is prepared to put
Yeah.
up with. If you look at the people who are advising Trump, what their ideology seems to be here, it basically seems to come down to they don't think that it's advantageous anymore for for the dollar to be the world reserve currency. They think if that status can change, then American exports can become cheaper and that can bring in revenue to the country. Now, for that to happen, Trump has to sort of bring his population with him because there are going to be negative effects of these tariffs. There are going to be, as you point out, inflation. They're going to be, potentially a recession. And I feel like Trump has not sort of explained the ideology. That's not a very
Well, he's
Trumpy
talked
thing
about the
to do.
medicine. People have to take their medicine, but they will benefit soon.
Well, exactly, but I don't think he's done enough to, you really have to go digging to find out what this ideology is. And
Yeah.
to carry it through, it's going to take months and months of pain. And ultimately, as popular as, Trump was within his own electorate, when they start paying more for things, when they start losing their jobs, are they going to stick by him? I would think not.
And as I said, also, even the practicalities, they say we're going to raise a load of billions and billions, which we're going to put towards our multi-trillion-dollar debt. But okay, that's great if you're going to get it from the tariffs. But if you do negotiate free trade deals, you don't have those tariffs, you're not going to raise that money. And equally, you're not going to be bringing onshoring on because, again, if you negotiate and then those tariffs aren't there, there'd be no reason for anyone to onshore. Plus, it's one thing someone choosing to onshore if they're a German car manufacturer moving to America, but you ain't going to be moving from Cambodia or Malaysia or China to America when the cost difference in labour is and regulation and everything is so great that it completely vastly outweighs any of the tariff costs. Just finally, back here in the UK, we've had Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves trying to calm everybody. I think Rachel Reeves is in Parliament today answering some questions, sticking to this line, that they're not going to do anything, not going to retaliate. They've got a consultation out. But it did occur to me, although this is going to damage the British economy, and it will, short term, who knows long term, it's kind of given the Labour Party a bit of a get out clause because we were looking at absolutely damning economic stats coming in, certainly in time for the autumn budget, possibility of more tax rises, more spending cuts, borrowing costs going up. Now it could well be the case that she's got an excuse that, well, it's all Donald Trump's. It's the orange man's fault. It's not my fault the economy is in such a bad way. She's got a get out of jail card, hasn't she?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's going to be incredibly difficult. I think when the OBR looked at the potential impact of tariffs for the spring statement. They basically said if what happens now is happening, which it is, it would wipe out her headroom again.
Yeah.
So we're going to be back in this position in the autumn where she's going to have to raise taxes or cut spending or potentially ditch her fiscal rules. And she now has a perfect excuse to do this. We already saw it a bit yesterday with them changing the rules on vans as part of net zeros. This is something that they know, the net zero rules specifically, that if they want Britain to grow, they need to push back on those, and that's something hard to do when it's so popular among their own electorate.
Yeah, and they say they're not ideological about it. Yeah, they are, because you can't be practical about it because those rules are insane.
Exactly, they are nuts, and I think Rachel Reeves probably does know that, and this will maybe give her a cover to do some things that Labour voters won't like.
Well,
so.
As I've always said, none of the net zero rules are going to survive any contact with reality. We know that. You only have to be a 6-year-old who can do some basic adding up to know that it doesn't make sense. But there we are. Michael Simmons, great to talk to you. Very much appreciate that. Economics editor of The Spectator. Tom Slater's still listening to this and still joining us. This is the thing. I mean, I can't quite work out the ideology behind the Trump thing, other than making America great again. I'm not sure making America poorer, certainly in the short term, is going to do that. But that's an interesting point Michael Simmons made about, what is the ideology and such as we can make it out, preparing the American people. Because we saw that in Argentina, didn't we, where Milei is elected like, OK, I'm going to be, slashing public spending, taxes are going to go up, but we're going to get the economy sorted. Massively, massively popular when he was elected, still popular even after doing all those things, but he prepared the ground.
No, absolutely. You prepare both the markets as well as your own domestic voters.
Liz Truss, take note.
Absolutely. I mean, John McDonnell did more to roll the pitch for Corbynomics than Liz Truss did for her mini budget. It's just that in his case, it got rejected at the ballot box rather than in the financial markets and bond markets rather. But it's this is a really important point. If you're going to do a big break with the status quo economically in whatever direction, people need to be behind you. People need to be know what you're doing. They need to have a clear sense of what the next steps are, a kind of sense of stability, even if it is a break with the past. That really hasn't been there with this. It makes it very hard to even judge as to in what direction it's going.
Exactly. I think the blind MAGA devotion and the Trump devotion syndrome, where people go, oh, it's brilliant. Like, he has given a different explanation of what the achievement will be and when it will be achieved every single time he's spoken. So I don't think Donald Trump even knows. I detect from watching some of his press conference yesterday from the Oval Office and all of his his men, his right hand men sitting near him, I detect a certain oops. I really do. I think there's a little oops feeling, but there we are.